Nitrogen cycle is something that's oftentimes confused by students. It even confused me. It can really seem confusing if you're just looking at some diagram trying to explain it, but once you actually understand what's really happening, it really becomes quite easy. So about the nitrogen cycle for your GCSE biology exams, you just need to understand the overall cycle and what exactly happens, and you just need to know 4 different types of bacteria that allow this cycle to work. It's essentially what powers this cycle to take place. So let's take a look at it. First of all, in the first part of this video, we'll take a look at the general cycle, but what actually happens. And then in the second part, we'll look at the 4 different types of bacteria that actually powers this movement to occur. So every single cycle, whether it be the carbon cycle or any other cycle, it's going to begin with nitrogen in the atmosphere, right? So this is the nitrogen cycle. So we're going to have nitrogen gas in the air. Imagine this is our atmosphere, the oxygen we breathe. Around 78%, let's do some context first. Around 78% of the air we breathe is nitrogen. Okay? It's found in our DNA, our proteins, our amino acids, and vitamins. It's really important. It's a crucial element in many biological compounds. And it's very unreactive. So although 78% of the air, and therefore the 78% of the air that we breathe in is nitrogen, we just breathe it back out. We don't actually absorb any of the nitrogen that we breathe in. That's why we rely on bacteria, the 4 different types of bacteria that we talked about. They convert the nitrogen into something that plants can absorb, because plants also can't absorb nitrogen. So thanks to the bacteria, the nitrogen in the atmosphere gets converted to some nitrate in our soil, which is then absorbed by our plants. If I can draw one. So the bacteria converts the nitrogen gas into a nitrate, which plants can then absorb. And when we eat the plants, we get the nitrogen back. And then there's this whole other process that I'll explain right now. So first of all, we're going to have the nitrogen gas in our atmosphere, in the air. And remember, plants and animals can't absorb this. We don't have a way to do this. So we rely on bacteria to do this for us. So it gets converted. This gets converted into something called a nitrate by bacteria. Oh, you know what? Let's just go through the bacteria right now too. Converted into nitrate by something called the nitrogen-fixing bacteria. Alright, the key bacteria names in blue. And you, by the way, you need to know the names of this. I know it sucks, but the names aren't like dumb. It kind of relates to what it does. Nitrogen-fixing bacteria. So a way that I remember this is the normal nitrogen, we can't absorb this, plants can't absorb this. But these bacteria, they fix the nitrogen so that we can absorb it. So it kind of fixes the nitrogen, so the nitrogen-fixing bacteria. So it's converted into nitrate, which can be absorbed by plants. And then what happens is it gets absorbed by plants. Absorbed by plants. So essentially so this is going to be in the soil, right? And the soil, when the plants absorb water and nutrients from the soil, they also absorb the nitrate. And when they absorb the nitrate, the plant grows, right? Absorbed by plants. And then it creates amino acids. Amino acids in plants. Plants use this to create amino acids. So essentially glucose, carbohydrates are energy sources. Now plants, there's animals that eat plants, right? Like cows or even us humans. So they get eaten by animals. And then the animals also get the nitrogen. So we basically get the amino acids. So animals get the amino acids, right? So the animals have now gotten the amino acids, but what's something that plants and animals both have in common? They all die. So we have our plants and we have our animals here, but these both die. They die. And they also make feces. So waste products, or a posher word, a scientific word, feces, like poop, essentially. So they die and they also produce feces whilst they're living. And these two things, they can get converted into, so by the way, the animal corpses and plant corpses and feces, they all have nitrogen. And what happens is we have something called a decomposing bacteria. Decomposing bacteria. And what the decomposing bacteria does is it's in the soil, right? So when everything, when it's dead and feces, it's all going to be in the soil, right? So decomposing bacteria in the soil, it converts the dead organisms and the corpses, essentially the corpses and feces, back into, so it converts it back into ammonia, which we initially started with. The nitrogen was converted by nitrogen-fixing bacteria into ammonia. And let me write decomposing bacteria in blue because it's one of the 4 bacteria that you will need to know for your GCSEs. So our decomposing bacteria converts these dead corpses, animal corpses, plant corpses, and feces into so these contain nitrogen in them. Nitrogen. They're converted back into ammonia by these decomposing bacteria. And then we have this new bacteria that takes this ammonia, and this bacteria is called the nitrifying bacteria. Nitrifying bacteria. And what can you think? What do you imagine when you hear the word nitrifying bacteria? It converts the ammonia back into nitrate that's useful. So nitrifying bacteria converts it back into nitrate, where it can now then be recycled. And essentially this cycle, it's a cycle that repeats. So the only source of new nitrogen is through the nitrogen in the atmosphere. But not all the nitrate gets converted into nitrogen. Nitrate gets absorbed by the plants again. Some of it gets converted by our fourth and last bacteria, known as a denitrifying bacteria. Do I have space here? Denitrifying bacteria. See, I told you, the names of these bacteria, they're super easy. There's nothing confusing about them. And that converts it back into nitrogen gas. And this is the nitrogen cycle. So, everything is pretty much easy. We have nitrogen gas in the air. That's the source of new bacteria into the cycle. We have something called the nitrogen-fixing bacteria. It fixes the nitrogen into something that can be absorbed by plants, because normal nitrogen, despite it being like 75% of the air that we breathe, we can't use it. Plants can't absorb it. Humans can't absorb it. We need it to be fixed. So it's converted into nitrate by nitrogen-fixing bacteria, absorbed by plants, amino acids in plants and glucose, and then it's eaten. And then last but not least, it gets decomposing bacteria, ammonia, nitrifying bacteria, recycled back into the cycle, and a denitrifying bacteria converts it back into nitrogen gas in the air.